For our Canadian lifters, pure passion, real results, what you put in your body should matter. Pure Vita Labs PVL supplements are clean, tested, and approved, powering athletes for over 25 years. They also power the KOTL podcast. You could trust PVL. Use code KOTL15 for partnership pricing at PVL.com. Okay, my man, we are here. The last couple episodes got discussion going about eras. And, well, more than just that. We have more than just eras. But the last two episodes have brought about some discussion. Among them, we're going to discuss how do you know when you're in an era? And by that, like, are we currently in the Taylor Atwood era? Or has the Taylor Atwood era, is it showing signs of slowing down, coming to a close? Or are we already in someone else's era? These are discussions. What makes up an era? Was there ever a Taylor Atwood era? Some people are like, no, sir, it was never a Taylor Atwood era. Back in the day, it was whoever else. So we'll investigate these and what we think make an era. Why is that coming up? Well, amongst other things, Perk hit 825, Austin Perkins, and rightfully so is proud of this. And like any athlete, enjoying a massive accomplishment is like, look at he walked off the platform, throwing the crown on his head, and it's signifying the Atwood era is coming to a close and the Austin Perk era is beginning. And so it leads some people to discuss, and we can discuss that a little bit here. And also then Nick Manners came on and echoed that. And then Nick Manners went a step further. Now, Nick said, when I asked about Taylor Atwood, he's like, he's washed. All right. I think he said that fired from the hip. He was looking for a soundbite more than likely, because he also took a step back for a second and said, look, I think he's going to win Worlds, and essentially said, I think the only one that's probably ahead of him is Austin Perkins. So, I mean, that doesn't mean you're washed up. He said washed up, but we know washed up means like you're done. And that doesn't mean you're done. What was your impressions when you heard those podcasts, first off, before we dive in?
Ryan, opinions are like assholes. Everybody has them. And a lot of the times they stink, even when...
Dude, we are showing our age when you come on here with those things, man. But that's why we're here.
I mean, it's like, I remember being in my early 20s. It wasn't that long ago. I'm sure you do as well. And you think you have some really interesting novel ideas. They're controversial. You're a little bit of a shock jock. You want to be heard. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some people like to post or say things purely because they get a response. Children like to set boundaries and figure out where they need to go and where they fit into a society. And because I am personally someone who is a scientist and values data, I think to decide what is an era, I think it requires some hindsight and it requires some level of backing. I don't think you can hit a total that is close to the highest total that has ever been hit while someone else is not currently at their peak and be like, yep, end of an era. I don't think that we can say someone is washed before when they're still winning world titles. And
well, you got to talk in 2 weeks to say that.
Yeah. But even then, like, is it the end of someone's era if they get a silver and then come back the next year and win gold?
Ooh, a good question.
We're forecasting some things. So Ryan, I respect King of the Lifts podcast. And because of that, when we started talking in the DMs about doing a podcast on eras, I did what any obsessive, data-driven powerlifting fan would do. And I collected data on every single weight class as to who has had the most dominant performances at the world championship level over time, how long those lasted, the ages they were when they did it. And that's only, I think, here's the thing though, Ryan, is just winning, I don't think is enough to be considered a cultural icon, which is part of being in an era. Because some of the people I'm going to mention, I guarantee you, most of the people in the powerlifting community don't even know, because maybe they didn't have an impact in the English speaking world. They didn't have a social media presence. They were a little before the social media boom, or they just didn't really play it up online. And I think there's a lot that goes into the perception of an era. It's about nostalgia. It's about how you felt during a certain period. Like, we had a West Side era in powerlifting, because the cultural meme, the thing we would think of when someone said powerlifting, was a super heavyweight, multiply, potentially enhanced lifter following some kind of, risk your life and limb type of approach, maximum effort days, etc. Now we're in the raw era. We're in the tested, untested era, where the tested division and the IPF is the biggest. And we also have this unique situation where the USAPL has split off from the IPF. And I think, maybe unpopular opinion among people who are in the USAPL, I think it's very challenging to say, if you just stay within one country, and this is someone who is an American. Granted, I'm also a New Zealander. I'm also a dual citizen. But someone who was born in the USA, served in the U.S. military, I can speak on freedom, folks. I will say that it's very challenging for you to claim that it is your era if you're only competing in the USAPL right now.
And what are your thoughts on why that is? Because, like, from my perspective, I would say I can see a clear difference between totals I see done domestically at nationals and then at world championships. And then the world championships floats from country to country, and region to region. So you deal with different time zones, different flights, etc. So somebody, for instance, like a Taylor Atwood, who's been at the very top since 2018, has done multiple different changes of regions, time zones, travels, and still maintained his number one status, as opposed to you can see the difference between totals domestically at nationals. And do you think and people can creep up on you out of nowhere when the talent pools globally, in terms of scouting, et cetera, when domestically you see almost everyone coming? Are those the factors you think that change it up?
They do. And, just to prove that we're not just two old men yelling at the clouds, there was a period in powerlifting where we were more fractioned. The USAPL and the IPF were smaller. It was before the raw boom, and all these other federations worldwide were much more neck and neck. It wasn't clear what was the dominant fed and where people were. It's a lot more clear now. Like, there's a main tested fed, there's a main untested fed, and then there's basically this kind of USAPL IPF newness kind of in the, like, there being two main tested feds. So back into like 2006, 5, 10, and even 12 and earlier, we didn't have open powerlifting. We had Powerlifting Watch. And this was this website that would collate all of the current world records and the best performances. And I think people were deciding who was the best powerlifter and whose era was it, just based upon numbers versus numbers, because there were so few head-to-heads, right? So that's still something. So I don't want to completely say that my view that just competing in the USAPL and putting up a bigger dots or a bigger number than anybody else for years on end isn't enough to make an era. But I think in the modern time, it's becoming partially that, but also partially everything you just said. Are you actually having these head-to-head within your weight class battles against people from the various other countries where there's really, really impressive lifters, like France, like New Zealand, like UK, like when Russia comes back, Russia, if Russia comes back, we will see against these emerging Asian countries that are getting more and more into powerlifting. And just always having everybody with home field advantage, I think it does inflate numbers a little bit. And there's something to be said for the fact that at the World Championships, it's not about putting up the biggest number possible. It's about who can do what they need to secure gold on the day, which often means that you get a lot of people missing their thirds because they're all vying for position. So I think Worlds is a great battleground, as Matt Gary would put it, to figure out who's the best powerlifter, not just who's the strongest. And we're at that point now where it's not just about maxing out. You have to decide who's the best athlete. And athlete skill is including the mental game, having good attempt selection, taking the smart answer, knowing when to be conservative, and knowing when to throw the Hail Mary and pull the heaviest deadlift in women's history to take the gold and win on body weight, or when to just push the other person by 1 kilo because you've got the last deadlift and just to chip it, so that you can win and have a for sure shot at being called a world champion. So when someone talks about it's my era and they don't even have a single world championship under their belt, they can be very, very strong. But I think that is in 2023, that's only one of the many things you need to have in your corner. I think you got to have a resume to have an era. And I think eras are decided after the fact. And if they're decided during, it's because someone has had a long reign and they have done a lot of things. Like we knew when we were in the Kim Walford era, right? I mean, yeah. How many world championships? Jen Thompson era. How many world championships, right? Sergey Fedosenko, right? I mean, like there are people who have eras that you get to live through and there's no debate. And then there are people who are emerging as someone who could have an era. And that's something to be respected. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying anything negative towards, Austin Perkins. I think he's a very viable potential era haver in the 74s who could be one of the most dominant people we've ever seen. But maybe he shouldn't have a crown on his head just yet.
I'll put it this way, though. This is for guys like us to debate. Done powerlifting analysts. But for the athletes, I think a guy like Austin saying, this is my era, throwing a crown on his head, you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're self-promoting, advertising, puff your chest out, and whoever wants to come and get it, blah, blah, blah. That I don't fault an athlete for doing that. But we're doing what we're supposed to do, where the athlete's supposed to be brave, bold, and loud and create some talk, which is great. It gives content for guys like us. Now we do what we're supposed to do and analyze, pull up data. Thank you for joining, dude. I trust nobody more than when you hop in here with that. And we are from yesteryear as well. So we remember multiple eras. We've seen people come and go. As a matter of fact, even though Austin's a young guy, he's been in the game since 2012 himself. He's a wily veteran despite being super young. So he kind of knows, but he's doing what he's got to do. And you apply pressure and all this bold talk Austin's doing. If him and Taylor clash, it's going to be can't miss. It's going to be it is literally the implications are going to be whose era is it? Is it the passing of the torch? And these are beautiful moments in sports when you see the old king pass the torch to the new king, or it's the final chapter in the old king where he's like, that was the last great threat I vanquished before I leave. Like, you don't know which one it's going to be, but it's a storyline. It's as old as sports, period. It happens in every single sport, right? So, that's why I don't mind what Austin and Taylor and the whole they're both doing what they're supposed to do. It's my era. Nah, it's my era. And then guys like me and you get to hop on podcasts and debate. So I have some ideas. Should we jump into, I have some ideas what I think comprise of an era and what helps you know the eras per weight class is an easier discussion. The eras in terms of pound for pound, I'm the king regardless of weight class is a different. More difficult to parse.
Yes.
Did the information you said you brought in, that was a per weight class. Did you want to do weight class first? It's a little easier. And then we get into the meatier debate of the pound for pound.
Yeah, I think we start there. And I'll also just echo, I'll say two things very briefly. The man in the arena thing is very much true. And we've talked about this. So I fully expect champions and people who are in the top 10 in the world or in a very competitive country to have that kind of back and forth. I encourage it. I don't want to make it sound like I'm discouraging it, but I think it's also likely that someone who is currently competing against someone else is not going to have the collective community's view. They're going to have maybe a biased view, like I want to win, Yeah. So, and that's fine. You should. Nothing wrong with that. And I think sports rivalries are things that can really drive competitors to be at their best. I fully see it as a rising tide lifts all ships. And the second thing I would say is I'm only a few weeks out from North Island's Masters 83 kilo, championships here in New Zealand.
Where are you defending that era? Is your era in question?
I'm trying to start an era where I'm going to set some Auckland regional records in the 83 kilo M1 division.
Is that right?
So you know what, man in the arena, maybe I'm in the arena still now that I'm dieting for a bodybuilding show, and I'm a 6-foot guy who's getting down to the 80s, and I just turned 40, so I can find this one moment in time where I'm above average enough to have a regional record. So
Nice.
you know, maybe I'll put a Kang on my head when I walk off with a very mediocre total that's better than the other old people who are light.
You're on here as a peer to Taylor Atwood, not
Correct.
as you just want to establish. Because I made it seem like you're like an analyst, but I misspoke, and I'm gonna back up.
That's right. That's
fair.
right.
That's fair. Okay. Okay, sir.
Okay. So to be clear, I tried to set myself some objective kind of looks at who's had dominant performances within weight classes. So to do that, there was a couple of things that I did. I had to look at each weight class and decide who has had the most consistent wins over time. So the first thing I prioritized was gold medals at Worlds in the Classic, which only goes back to 2012. After that, it was number podium of appearances. And then when things were unclear, then I would also go to, okay, were they also competing in Equipped? Were they also competing in World Games? Did they go on outside of the IPF? And by the way, I kept it to IPF just because I think it's easier. That doesn't mean that the whole powerlifting community puts IPF on a pedestal, but that is, we've got to put some constraints around this discussion. So I hope people are okay with that limitation, right? And it wasn't always clear. And I do think there was something very interesting that shook out, and I'm going to plant a seed, is that if you're thinking you're going to be the king and have an era, and your age starts with the number 2 or 1, hold your horses, okay? Because it actually takes some time to, 1, reach a true peak, and then 2, to hold on to it long enough. And if you're someone who shoots your shot and you're, the best in the world at 21, you better hope you keep holding on based upon the data, or you might be running into that issue that juniors often do of early burnout, early injury, and dropping out. So I would encourage people, even though they're competitive, to think about, how do I have longevity and consistency and give myself the chance to have an era and to have a legacy by being competitive for as long as possible, instead of being, Icarus, who flew too close to the sun at an early age, the star that shone bright and burned out. We don't want to be that. All right. So Ryan, would you like me to start with the women or the men?
Let's do the gentleman first.
Okay. So we're starting off with the 59 kilo class, and the answer is very obvious as to who had the longest era, and that's Sergey Fedosenko. He's won every Classic Worlds. That's 9 golds from 2012 to 2021, except for 1. And he did that from the ages of 29 to 39. This is possibly the most dominant performance we have seen in the IPF raw division, ever anywhere, right? I know that's somewhat of a tainted record, and we can talk about that as we get into some of the other individuals. Like if someone did have a suspension for an adverse finding in their drug testing, et cetera. One thing I will say, because I have heard this argument, is, if someone was, using something on the side and doing a little anabolic usage or whatever, then that could extend their era. I think that's not the most clear argument, because it's not like you see the untested people lasting long into their 40s and 50s. You are burning the candle at both ends of the stick, and it's not clear. Obviously, they're probably not using as much if they're trying to get away with using substances in a tested organization. But I don't think we can just say that, the hypothesis I'm seeing here, that you need to make it into your almost middle age if you want to have an era, is changed by whether someone might have been using anabolics. But I'll just say that that's open for debate. In the 66s, we have a less clear but still pretty clear person here, and that's Sergey Gladych. And he has 2 golds, 2 silvers, and 1 bronze at the Classic Worlds from 2016 to 2021, from the ages of 26 to 31 was when he was dominant. The 74s is where it gets a little more interesting and a little less clear. If we wanted to go strictly by the criteria of who's won the most and prioritizing higher medal placings to others, it's actually Alexander Hrnkovic, which I might be mispronouncing, and he won gold 4 times from 2013 to 2016, from the ages of 36 to 39. Okay. All right. However, it's at a very, very close second to that, and with a more dominant performance overall. I think it's very difficult to not say. And also, these are probably two different eras because, like I said, Alexander ended in 2016. After that, we got Taylor Atwood, obviously, with 3 golds and 2 silvers from 2016 to 2022, and that's from the ages of 27 to 33. So
I'll add
again,
one more caveat, if I may.
yes,
Atwood also was number one during the year that COVID took away a Worlds. And then
true,
2021, we had another Worlds that he didn't participate. He could easily have had 2 more gold medals because it was undisputable that he was the
100%.
number 174 both those years. So he could easily be another 2 gold medals on there. In terms of if you look at medals won or just years, was he the best 74? Here's
Yes.
his dynasty from this year to that year. It's a little more definitive towards Taylor.
I totally agree, and I think it's almost not really an issue in this weight class because there was a handing of that torch in 2016 is where Taylor went silver last year, that Alexander I think won gold, and then after that Taylor was the dominant one and still is at the world class level. Now, where it gets pretty confusing and where the trend of people being a little older and extending an era is in the 83s, and I think this makes sense because basically the 83s to the 105s are the most competitive classes in the men's division because there's the most people weighing in these kind of middle to light heavy classes. Just a population thing, more probability of more people being really, really good and close. Brett Gibbs is probably the most obvious one here, with 2 golds and 3 silvers from 2015 to 2019 between the ages of 24 to 28. But then you've got to give a close second, or maybe the era after, to Russell Orhii. And he won 2 golds and 1 silver from 2018 to 2021 from the ages of 23 to 26. And he's still obviously very dominant in the USAPL. And, that is continuing, and we might see him returning. So I don't think it's unfair to say that we're in the Russell Orhii era now. Before that, we were in the Brett Gibbs era, and that both of those gentlemen have not yet hit or were not in their 30s by the time that occurred. So there's something to be said there, but they're not winning like 9 titles like Sergey either. And that could be from competitiveness, or, it's debatable as to what's going on there. And I think that's pretty interesting. But the 83s is the only exception to the rule when we go through the rest of the kind of the age attached to era thing, which I think is pretty interesting.
One note I'd add on that. Yeah. Again, it's almost the same thing with Russ. He missed the COVID era, came back for 2021. So that would have been one more world title for him. Came back, which would have nudged him ahead, I think, of Russ, right? Or Brett, sorry.
It would. Yeah, I think it would have, because if he had 1 more gold, then he would have 1 gold more than Brett Gibbs.
That's right.
Brett has 2 golds, 3 silvers. Yep.
So, and he was the 83 that year that we lost it to COVID, came back. And because he came back and won in 2021, helps the argument again. Look, more than likely I would have took that in the year that we lost. And then, of course, despite the split, he is a dominant force at that weight class now. He's not, and he traveled. He went to South Korea, although as a 90, though, but at least he is traveling, etc. So I'm comfortable with, kind of like you said, echo what you said about we had a Brett Gibbs era, and now we got a Russell Orhii era, and there's 2 different eras going on. I'm comfortable with that.
Yep, and they were, I think an important thing about both of these 2 gentlemen is that while they have far fewer titles, and the reign wasn't quite as long as some of the other categories that we've talked about and will talk about, they have had a outsized impact on the sport comparative to just what they've done on the platform. They have both generated a lot of interest and 2 different kind of ages of social media. And with, I'll be honest, like Brett Gibbs was very, very popular at his time, but wasn't necessarily as out there on social media as Russ. So it's interesting to see how that's occurred. And I think that is part of it. It's, what is it? People remember how you made them feel more than anything else. And I think these are 2 examples of people who stand out in the minds of people when they look back, to some degree, independent of just how dominant they were in their performances, which is part of the conversation. It's a little more qualitative, and I think that's worth discussing. But for this, I think it's just useful for people to know, like, you can't be a cultural icon in powerlifting if you aren't doing anything on the platform, right? So one of the boxes I think you have to check if you want to have a legacy in the sport, have an era, is that you need to win a fair amount or do pretty damn well, you know.
Mm.
And so that's kind of why we're taking care of just that quantitative part of the conversation in this era discussion. All right, so 93s.
Yeah.
This is a tougher one because it's kind of interesting. So Christoph Wierzbicki is probably the most dominant person in the 93s, which is a very competitive class. From 2012 to 2015, won gold 4 times from the ages of 22 to 25. And then he gets an honorable mention even past the 93s because he went to the 105s and won gold in 2017, won bronze in 2018. Best year in the 93s ever, by the way, not biased at all. And then and then I have to say that his era in IPF is over, but it's not he's not done. He switched from the IPF and he has won world titles in other organizations all the way up to 2021. And he's done some really cool things with the deadlift, single ply and raw. And he won the last world title, I think, in 2021 in another federation at the age of 31. So still peaking. Okay. So I think this is a good example of someone who has been dominant and one like at his peak from his early 20s into now his early 30s, and we'll see what the future holds. And interestingly enough, the only other potential contender there is Ellis McLean, who I love his story of how he got to Worlds 2 years in a row for being an alternate from the USAPL. I think it's very challenging to say that there was an Ellis McLean era. I'm not going to claim there is, but I do want to give a shout out just to how hard it is to win multiple golds in this division. And LS is actually one of the people who won 2 golds, and he did that 2017 and 2018 at the ages of 38 and 39. So again, not claiming an era, it's just kind of an interesting factoid that it's obviously Christoph and nobody else. And one of the closest people after him is LS, just to show how much there's changing of hands in that division.
Let me throw this out there.
Go for it.
What about Kaiko? And again, I know that your research, we already heard the Brammers, and I respect that because you need stuff. But
Yep.
Just as a fan, if I think about eras, I would nudge Kaiko beneath Wierzbicki. Maybe we're getting close to uneven ground. I don't know, because Kaiko, I can't remember the year he established himself as the premier 93. I want to say 2019. And then he was the premier 93, and we're at 2023, and he's back again at Sheffield, winning the battle of the 93s. I understand Chance wasn't there, but he out-totaled Chance anyways. So if he had won the battle of the 93s at Sheffield, but his total was lower than Chance's, then we'd have a caveat to that, but we don't. He's essentially regained form as the head of the 93s. So I could propose. I mean, he's won, if not all the world titles, major battles, and Sheffield is uber big event, and again, he lost the COVID worlds, but yeah, and in a very competitive class. So I think I would throw Kaiko as number 2, and he's approaching. Let's see what he does in a few weeks, because 93s is stacked. And it's only going to get more stacked when some USAPL guys come over. If he can maintain this run, it might be him overtaking Wierzbicki even.
I don't disagree with you. And this is one of those tough things where people who are coming up right around the time COVID happened are losing out a little bit. But you're not wrong. He's got a world title. So he's got a gold. He's got a bronze, which is nothing to sneeze at, and how competitive the 93s are at last year's Worlds. And he took second at the Sheffield, and which should probably count for something. So, like I said, you set some criteria, you got to stick to it, but then it gets hard. Like he's also won, I think, 2 Raw Nationals titles, right? Which is really competitive. But then, when I start looking at nationals, and then I got to consider a lot of other things. Like then, okay, well, Bryce has got a silver and a gold in the 105s, and he's won 3 national titles at 105 and 1 at 93. But I don't think we've had a Bryce era. But I think obviously there are other things here that just go into then medal counts, and I would agree that Jonathan Keiko is like right on the cusp. I think he wins a gold this year. If he can pull off a win at Malta, then someone could make the argument, though, we're definitely in the Kaiko era right now. And again, personal feelings, how much I like him, easily one of my favorite lifters in the whole sport. Shout out to Kaiko. John, what's up, man? I'm looking forward to seeing you in Malta. But just kind of going by the numbers, I think it's hard to say that, partially because of COVID, but I totally understand where you're coming from. And I think he is someone who could be dominant for a while. And it is interesting that he's just turned 30. So there you go.
He's got some room. It's just crazy. And then Brendan Petrie, if he comes over, he's a 90. Brendan at a 93. I mean, let's see what he happened. Let's see what it is. Like Kaiko's gone is heavier domestically as well. Obviously, he's done up to 892.5, I believe. Like Kaiko can hit. He can go up, man. He's got the record at 93 regardless. Petrie is a stitch over 93, and he did more. So it'll be tough. We'll see. We'll have to see what the future brings. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry. We'll move.
And no, you're not totally. I really appreciate that context, and I think it's important to say that being the strongest is part of it as well. But I'm saying I'm the best 93 right now, or I'm the best 83, or I'm the best 105, or I'm the best 90, or I'm the best 110. Doesn't necessarily mean you get to claim an era, right?
I know. I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's why I think Kaiko's claim is reinforced with so many battles he's had. And the quality of opposition has been outstanding. And he's done it all over the world. And then again, at Sheffield, in terms of you want to talk pressure cooker, does he live up to the pressure? He's been in so many battles, but it's good. It's good sports debate. This is when you get into that freaking NFL Dan Marino types of conversations. But anyways, all right, my friend, 105s. What are we looking at?
105s. So 105s, again, a very, very competitive class. The title bounces around a lot. And someone who you wouldn't think it's an era, and I'm not claiming it's an era, but the closest thing we have to it is actually Eli Burke. And Eli Burks has won 2 golds in 2016 and 2019. There's not anyone else who's done that. Believe it or not, that's how competitive the 105s is. We always got the battles of the 105s, right? And he did that at the age of 29 and 32. The closest thing I think we can say to there being an era in the 105s is going back to Christoph Wierbecki, because he crosses both classes and he was dominant. And he kind of just carries with him this I'm the Terminator and I'm unbeatable aura that crosses both weight classes. And he's a threat no matter what with that monster deadlift. So I think I'm with all due respect to Eli, I'm not going to claim there's an Eli Burke era.
No, okay.
We're not going to, but that's just that this is actually good proof to say that purely doing medal count is not enough. I think, when you've only got 2 golds, it's not probably enough to call it an era. So when someone doesn't even have a gold yet, but they've got the other pieces, like you're the strongest, or you've got social media clout, or you're well known, or you got a good personality, I don't think that's enough either. So I think it's an interesting example in the 105s, just to say that, yeah, especially in these competitive divisions, you've got to be a little more dominant than that, or have all those other pieces. Like, yeah, you've only won 2 golds, but you did them and blew away the competition, and you posted the world record that stood for multiple years that year, or you've still got the highest, total in that weight class, despite not having that many titles. So yeah, it's a tough thing. If you're in these kind of middle to light heavyweight classes in either the men's or women's, it's pretty challenging to have an era, because there are so many people there and they're so competitive. So yeah, 105s. When is there not a battle of 105s, Ryan?
And I'll add to this, looking at the USAPL lifters, we have some 110s that are checking in under 105, but I'm told it could be bulking. It might be coming in heavier over 105. But even then, a clear far and ahead champ we do not have. It's so neck and neck. Nobody's head in leagues above the others. So yeah, it's just always like this. Even in the USAPL to the IPF to wherever you go to establish yourself as a dominant force year after year, like we're talking, it's going to be tough. We'll have to see.
Yeah. Bob Matthews, Ashton Rushka, Keenan, there's the USAPL probably has the best people right around that 100 kilo mark right now in the world. And it would be really cool to see them all come over to the IPF. I think they would be dominant. And I think if there was an era, it would be like an era of them all competing against each other, trying to see who could be the dominant force for a period. And that's another thing. Like when you think about sports where there's multiple contenders who are all leagues above the rest, that's a really cool time for the sports fan as well, where you have this trade back and forth of these battles between these really, really impressive competitors who all have something different to complement each other. So there's something to be said for that, where there's a shared era between three top vying competitors where no one's clearly on top, but they're all clearly elite athletes, which I think can happen in some of these more competitive divisions. And I think it's a good thing for the sport too.
We'll also have to see, before we move on to 120s, Anatoly's back. Like Anatoly was the best lifter in 2021 and his total in 2021 was like 937 and a half. His progress stopped. Everyone else in USCPL has kept going, but obviously the conflict in the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
But we all saw his squat, 365 kilos, 804 pounds. And I DM'd him. I told people on King List I'd DM him and ask him his total. I DM'd him and asked him his total. And he said, my friend, we're going to keep that low key until Worlds. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I don't know what to expect from Anatoly, but if those fellas from USAPL come over, if Anatoly could go back and then regain progress and make it back up, because he's a young man himself and not peaked yet, not in his prime yet. And he'd be right up in the mix. But, life really got a little crazy over there, and it is what it is. We'll have to see if he can regain form. All right, 120s, my friend. We got some ground to cover.
120s. We got two potential candidates, and one of them does have that same issue of getting banned, and that's Mohamed Bouafia. He's got 3 golds, 1 silver from 2012 to 2016, and he did that all the way up to age 40, which is the time point when he was last on an IPF stage. He's still competing in other feds after the age of 40, and presumably probably still taking banned substances. And now that he's not being tested, probably in greater degrees. So if anything, I think this is a testament to longevity and age, because like I said, I don't buy the argument that you can be dominant at an older age because you're taking PEDs, because those, and depending on the dosage, those can also shorten your competitive longevity. If someone if we don't want to touch that at all and just be like, look, because of the ban, that makes that there's too many confounders. The obvious next one is Dennis Cornelius. He's got only 2 golds, but also a dominant record and just way ahead of everyone else in the 120s. And he won gold at 2016 and 2017 at the ages of 36 to 37. And he's still going strong at 40. It's pretty impressive. Dennis Cornelius is just, I met him at Belarus. I love the guy, very down to earth and just ridiculously strong. But again, this is one of those things where it'd be really cool to see, some of the other folks from USAPL come over and take a crack at that. You just recently had Tony Cliff on, which was great to have him talk about his experience and how he's kind of hitting his peak at 39 as well. So I think there's some more data points here that even when lifting this heavy and being that big of a person in the 120s, there's something to be said for longevity for sure.
Yeah, Dennis Cornelius's 120 record stood until, and this is what I love that Rondell did, staying under 120 despite being in the USCPL where it's 125, understanding the historical significance. Because it's not very deep with 125 in terms of the tested division. That's an untested division. And he knew historical significance lies with Dennis Cornelius and the work done over there. So he's like, I'm going to weigh under 120. So he did take that record, but it took years for someone to take that. To your point, when you lay down, a record like that and it stands in a sport where records fall every 6 months, in a record to stand years like that for a freak like Rondell, who's a freak athlete, to come around, and it's Rondell who had to took it, that speaks volumes to Dennis Cornelius and his impact, despite only having 2 titles. His shadow is huge in the 120s. 120 pluses, my friend. I think we know where we're going with this one, kind of like Fedoshenko.
It's pretty straightforward. We've got the man himself, Ray Williams, and he is, a great example of someone who's extended his career into his third. Like, he's still going. We're still waiting for the head-to-head. Hopefully it does happen with him and Jesus. But from 27 to 31, he won 5 golds between 2014 to 2018 at Worlds and was a completely dominant force. And we got excited for Jezo Wepa. We got excited for Kelly Branton, but in reality, neither one of them was actually touching him. They were just close enough for us to focus on a single lift where they might be there and maybe give a root for the plucky underdog. But Ray Williams was truly in a class of his own. And that has only changed with Jesus. And Jesus, man, I think despite the fact that there has not been the longevity yet, that he's so young, he won the Sheffield. He does have a world title, and his total is the heaviest thing in powerlifting, period. So this is where I think there's a really good example if you can't just go by the metric we're talking about, because I do think we're in the Jesus Oliveira era. How could we not be, right? And
look at it, in a couple of weeks, he could have 3 titles already because he won
right.
2020.
Exactly.
So, and then Ray's got 5. He's almost, look how quickly he's almost catching up. Like time is flying, my friend. We're almost at 3/5 of the way, as well as he's got the biggest total period. And he's talking about, so he's got the biggest total period, tested or untested. He's got the biggest total powerlifting all time, regardless. He's now talking about in sleeves, taking the biggest total all time, untested, wrapped as well, while he's still natty in sleeves. I mean, that's just head and shoulders. We're going to put a pin in that, what I think constitutes a pound for pound era. But that is just head and shoulders above everybody else. Let
me ask you a real quick question.
Yeah.
God forbid something happens to Jesus tomorrow, and catastrophic injury, life tragedy, whatever. And I swear to God, no one wants this to happen. Knock on wood, it won't happen. Did he have an era, or was he just the GOAT who didn't have an era, though?
I think that's an era. This is an era. I think so, because I got to think so, because the only reason why I say that, I realize we didn't get the passing of the torch with Ray, but he was posting up the biggest total, and Ray hadn't since. Like when Jesus emerged, it would have been clearer if there was a passing of torch directly on the platform between Jesus and or like Ray to Jesus, for sure. We didn't have that, so there was a murky period. But 2020 hindsight, and you had said that earlier, you kind of know if it's an era when you look back. Now that we look back, we know Ray never did emerge back, because there was the threat early on. Ray might come back to old form and out total, but he never has, and it's been years now. So now when we look back, and Jesus took the title in 2021, he really was the best, and Ray was not coming back. 2022, he is the best. 2023, it doesn't even super matter what happens at Worlds. He already did it at Sheffield. Even if your plausible scenario, he wins the lottery and says, thank you very much, I just put a positive spin on your scenario, and says, I retire before.
It's much better.
Yeah, it's a little better. He doesn't, Ray's like, sorry, Jesus is like, do I got to die, homie? Can I just get a movie role with The Rock? Yeah. How about The Rock calls me up?
Retire?
Yeah, can I retire okay. So he retires. Even without that record, even without the title that's about to happen in a couple of weeks, more than likely, say it's going to happen anyways, I think he's got an era. If he takes this,
I don't know. I'm going to disagree, because I don't think an era can be 3 years. That's just too short of time. Like that's my only debate. I think you could say he is the greatest powerlifter the sport has ever seen. He was far and ahead of his time as an age. But if we're talking about 21 to 23, 2021 to 2023, is that an era, or is that like couple of years?
I'll tell you what, it's definitely a couple of years, but is it an era?
I think that's debatable. So
that's debatable. That is. If he wins this title, though, Greg, that's tough. I guess you better be impactful, which he has, though. The biggest performance of all time in the biggest meet of all time, too. Like in terms of cultural impact, Jesus is, I mentioned this before. I listen to podcasts about other sports, and they bring up Jesus. And this is a MMA podcast. And you hear about that guy? Like he's transcended. They talk about him. He's done that already. So I should know.
I'll say this, though. I don't think he's at his peak. I think Jesus can keep improving, as frightening as that is.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of having an era is longevity. And a big part of longevity is having an extended peak, not being that star that burns out, but gets high, but could have gotten higher. So I want to see Jesus keep improving and then extend that peak as long as possible. And I know that's hard as a super, but it would be awesome to see him reach his 30s and have just been this ridiculous dominant force that is untouchable in powerlifting. And I don't think we've quite seen that yet. We haven't seen the head-to-head with Jesus and Ray. I don't know that we will, but we have. But Ray is still in position to try to do better than he has done previously. He's on the other side of a PhD. He's on the other side of some business decisions. He's on the other side of having a child, if I recall correctly. And he's got some time before NAPF where you can set world records. It's not head-to-head, but it's possible that Ray could re-achieve his peak. And then if we see Jesus shakes out, gets another world title, I think then we'll be like, yeah, that was an era. But right now, I just think it's a little too early to call it. But if I had to bet money, if I went to Vegas and be like, okay, what era do you think is going to be where we're at in the 120 pluses? I'd be like, oh, yeah, all on red. Like, absolutely Jesus,
And Jesus won his first open title as a junior. So in terms of longevity, again, nothing's for sure, but it's looking good. It looks good. Yeah. It looks promising. Let's move to the women's because we need to save some time to have this big pound for pound debate. I got did a little research myself and I want to pull some numbers, but let's talk about the women's.
All right. The women, it's pretty clear in some weight classes and others, it's a little more up for debate. So the 47s, by my original criteria of who has the most world classic medals, prioritizing golds, it's Heather Connor with 2 golds and 2 silvers from 2016 to 2022 from the ages of 35 to 31. But it's very difficult to not bring up Chen Wei Ling, even though she's got 2 golds, 2012 and 2015, and no other podium placings, because she has 1 gold, 1 silver, and 2 bronzes in the World Games, and then 6 golds, 4 silvers, and 1 bronze in Open Worlds between 2001 to 2017, Ryan. What is happening from the ages of 19 to 35?
And she's an Olympic gold, Olympic weightlifter who won gold, and her record stood. What we're talking about, like forever. Heather took that record. I think she took it at a national level, but regardless, there was a bit of that's the passing the torch. I think you could definitely say she had an era, and then Heather's era came after her, and Heather has an era, and I would, again, just to add another little piece on here. I know it's early. On the exact same timeline as Jesus Oliveira's 2021, Turbo Tiff took her first title. And then Turbo Tiff had to beat Heather head-to-head because Heather had previously done a bigger total, not at the Worlds, but did have a bigger total in her back pocket. So and wasn't there in 2021 Worlds. So a more definitive win for Turbo Tiff era beginning was 2022. It's too soon to have an era. Yeah. I already know you're going to say, and I would agree with you, by the way. But Turbo Tiff is taking it to heights we never imagined for a 47. So we had the Wiley era, Heather, and it looks like the beginning of a new era with Turbo Tiff, but we got to see because,
bro, 2 weeks,
2 weeks, it'll help. To the point of Jesus. Is it enough? I don't know.
On paper, for this criteria specifically, if Turbo Tiff wins gold in 2 weeks, she'll be the only 47 in the history of Raw Worlds to have 3 golds.
Let me ask you this though. Kind love. Heather, the passing of the torch. Okay, the Turbo Tiff era. Did it start in 2021 when Heather wasn't there? And clearly Heather had an era, but she wasn't there, and it's politics, wasn't anything to do with Heather.
Yep.
Or did it start when she beat Heather head up, fair and square in 2022? When did Turbo Tiff's era start?
I would probably say when we look back, it'll probably, if Heather is never able to retake, like if there's any back and forth, then it's going to be this the kind of thing I described earlier. It's the era of Turbo Tiff and Heather battling.
Yeah. Which would be amazing to watch.
I would love it. I would love to see Heather get another spurt in strength. That'd be awesome. If Heather never beats Turbo Tiff again, I think it'll default to when she beat her head to head.
So it won't be 2021. 2021 will be like obviously it's a great win, but it's tough because we're talking eras. We're not talking
Yeah.
title reigns. It's a little
Right.
different. And
Yeah,
I
it
think
is.
it's
It's
cool.
subjective.
It's cool that their paths actually crossed for both of them. For sports fans, you love to see, because there's no denying Heather had an era, and it clearly looks like Turbo Tiff is doing some special things, and well, she is in the 47s period. But
Absolutely.
it's just early days, and we'll have to see. All right, sir, 52s.
52s is interesting. So there's Sophia Loft, who won 3 golds from 2014 to 2016, from the ages of 23 to 25, and then haven't heard much from her since then. But then there's also Noemi Alibert, who has 2 golds, 2021 to 2022, and also got a silver in the 47 kilos in 2019, and just placed second narrowly at the Sheffield. So those are 2 distinct periods, and I would say that I'm happy to say that we are in the Noemi Alibert era, with basically, even though she has not the same resume quite as Sophia Loft, but 2 golds, 1 silver in another weight class, and a silver at the Sheffield. That's got to count for something, I think.
Hang on a second.
Yep.
Can we be?
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, I mean, can we be in the Noemi Alibert era when she's currently the number 2 in the world?
100% agree. So that's another thing, is that she did just lose head to head on world record totals, not just some weird comp where where a different 52 beat her. So right now, on paper, the best 52 in the world is Evie Corrigan. So we are in a very interesting position right now where, and it wasn't a dominant win, right? There was
it's close.
Single digit number between them. So this is an interesting one. And you also have to ask the question, and I'm saying this pretending like I don't know them, because I actually do, of, can someone who got really shredded to compete in the 52s stay in the 52s long term? I don't know. Evie's tall for a 57, right? So is she going to stay there, or was this, hey, I can do this, I could do this, but this might not be the best decision for me long term? So there's a lot of question marks around the 52s right now, because we just don't know what the future holds. There's probably going to be some back and forth battles. We don't know how long both of these people are going to be involved at this level. Can they keep progressing? I don't know. I mean, Evie's looking good on her Instagram, I'll tell you what. So
let me say something. We are in the Noemi Alibert era. If Noemi comes back, defends her title, beats Evie head to head at the 100%. World Championship, then it would be like, yeah, it's still my era. I took an L because I'm in a competitive class, but it was always my era. And I think you could say that. She could actually be like, this is my era. Just like you can be in the Muhammad Ali era, you lose, come back, win again. It's still your era. And it's not the other person's era, because they got 1 win in there. Ken Norton doesn't have an era, but he's got a win over Ali. But Ali beat him twice. So that's where. That's
a great point, Ryan. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll see. 57, sir.
57, we got Ina Filimonova with 3 golds and 1 bronze from 2014 to 2018, from the ages of 38 to 42. And I would also point out that she got 5 golds, 1 silver, and 1 bronze in open worlds from 2002 to 2015, from the ages of 26 to 39. So, folks, you need to stay in the game. Do not be the junior who taps out, or you're not going to have an era. It's pretty hard to do, okay? Then I think there's also a case to be made for the Joy Namani era, which I think we're currently in. And I would go ahead and give that to her, because she's got 2 golds from 2021 to 2022. But she's also got 2 golds and 1 bronze from 2017 to 2019 in the 52 kilo class, from the ages of 24 to 30. So, I think Joy is still at the top, still at her peak, and is still in very highly competitive classes doing the damn thing. And I think it's fair to say, I don't know about you, Ryan, that we're currently in the Joy Namani era.
Here's what I'll say. First off, in terms of her run, it's split over 2 weight classes, and we're divvying this up by weight classes. So it's going to be difficult. It's tough against her, but a 4-time world champion stretched over 2 different weight classes. She's had a hell of a run. She's got an
Hell
era.
yeah.
There's no question she's got an era. Who wins
Agree.
4 world titles in the open? And at that, it's the best of the best that she's facing in 2 different weight classes, no less. Like, for sure, she has an era. Are we still in the era? Because
we'll see. 2 weeks.
It's the exact same conversation. Ask me in 2 weeks. Then I'll be able to tell you, because if Jad Jacob, who obviously beat her, took her world title at the end of 2022, took her world record, at the end of 2022, beat her head to head in Sheffield. And then if she beats her once again at Worlds, I'm convinced. First, you took her record, then you took her head to head, then you took her title at Worlds. And then we're entering into, is it, again, doesn't mean it's the Jad Jacob era. You need to do a lot more than just one good year, but it'll be clear she's no longer number 1 in her weight class, which it might not signify the Jad Jacob era because Natalie Richards could come around or whatever, but it will signify the end of an era.
100%.
Whose new one is starting? We don't know. And to your point earlier, you might not even have another era started for another 5 years. Dominance is hard to come by, huh? Some divisions like the 105s never get it. So
exactly,
just because one era closes doesn't mean a new one's starting. It just means one closed. So pay homage to the person that closed, because you could wait 10 flipping years for another one to start. Hats off to Joy. She did her damn thing.
That's right.
63s, my friend.
60, actually, the 63s. And by the way, I didn't do the 76s because for an era, I think we've established needs to be some length of time. The 76s and the 69s just haven't been around enough. So I did the 63s, 72s, 84, and 84 pluses. All of them have a clear singular person who's had an era, and I'm not sure we've had one since, or those eras are still going. So in the 63s, we got Jen Thompson with 4 golds and 1 silver from 2012 to 2018. From the ages of 38 to 44, Miss Frizzle herself benching more than anybody else in terms of body weight. Still the most dominant bencher, period, ever. No qualifiers needed. Don't put a weight class on there. Don't put a sex on it. When you figure out how much she's benching at her body weight,
at her age,
makes no sense. At her age, exactly. It is nonsense. And for your bench to be that much of a weapon in a sport that is typically you're building your total with your squat and your deadlift, it is a true sight to behold. It is more than 4 standard deviations above what a good bencher is in the 63s. So yeah, very clearly Jen Thompson. Are we still in that era? I think we may be after it, but like to your point, no one has taken up the torch.
For 63s? Oh, I think Leah Bavois ended that discussion of...
Well, she's a 69 now, right?
Right, but Jen Thompson's not the number 1 63 in the world right now.
No. I'm saying I'm sorry. Jen Thompson's era is over, but I don't know that anyone's taken up the torch to be the new 63 kilo era.
I was gonna say, dude, you are a heavy Jen Thompson fan. If you're trying to say she's still the queen, I'm like, okay,
all right. Not at all.
You had me,
no,
and then you lost me. No, okay, gotcha. I understand now. Yeah, no. To your point, in terms of dominance, Leah won 1 world title, and like obviously that's not era 1 world title we're talking about. And world records, and was for sure the premier lifter. Gara 2019, Gara back, Leah gone. Gara still in her 20s, I believe. If she can establish herself in the 63s, she already had 1 title. She's won in world games. She's won in equipped. You know, if she comes back and reasserts herself, and I think she can, we might see a Gara era, but it's so highly competitive. We're way ahead of ourselves to even start talking that. She needs like a run of 3 more titles to do that. So we haven't seen one since Jen.
Yeah, and to your point, I think that Leah Bavois is the best female powerlifter alive. I think she has the potential to have similar status to Taylor Atwood across all weight classes. But we haven't had a Leah Bavois era yet because it's early days.
Let's hang on one sec. When we wait for pound for pound.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
I got some information I'll pull up for everybody. Okay. So let's move to
72s.
Skipping 72s. Okay, there we are.
Yeah, that's another thing. Is so like 76s and 69s, they're not getting love in this conversation because they're just new weight classes. You know, I would love to give the 76s some love because if there is a 76 era, we're in it. It's Jessica Bittner, but it's highly contested. And that's why there can't be a 76 era, right? And the same thing is true of the 69. So
Chandler Babb, yeah, same.
Exactly. Like so it purely this is a no beef against anybody on those weight classes, and you will have your chance now that this is going to be the weight classes moving forward. But I think if we're going to look historically at just who's winning over a long period of time, we have to use the classes, unfortunately. So 72s, literally no question. Kim Walford, 5 golds, 2014 to 2019. Oh, and by the way, she has 2 golds in the 63 kilo class in 2012 and 2013 between the ages of 33 and 40. That era is recently over. I think that's relatively clear with Kim's performances in the last couple competitions she's done. She's still a threat for maybe the podium, or at least top 5, and she's still an incredible competitor. But I think we are just coming down on the tail end of her peak, but definitely in the GOAT conversation, one of the most dominant performances in powerlifting history, and certainly one of the most dominant performances in the raw IPF history, which only extends back to 2012 at the world class level, but still just very, very dominant performance there for sure.
And she also, and like 100% echo everything you said, and I'll even add on to that, as we have for others about COVID years. She lost a year due to some politics.
Mm-hmm.
Long story, not going to get into it now, but you could easily have put in another world title onto there, and her run of dominance was insane. So, but yeah, there's a COVID year as well as a political year, and yeah, her title reigns something else, man. She won't be forgotten by anybody who remembers her. We remember, so we'll keep her name going. All right, sir, 84s.
So this is Yelja Strick, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, with 5 golds, 1 silver, 2 bronzes from 2012 to 2019, as well as a silver in the 2013 World Games, and that's from the ages of 38 to 45. With that said, I do think, even though we don't quite have the medal count to support it, it's very difficult to not give some credence to Amanda in the 84s right now. I mean, she is so far ahead of the rest of the pack. If you were to take a look at the dots or IPF points or good lift points from the Sheffield, even though based upon beating the world record, she didn't win the whole thing. That was, Evie. So dominant that I think we can probably say that we're in the Amanda Lawrence era now. How do you feel about that? Do you think there's enough time behind it?
I think there's no question, my man. Here's why. Like, she took,
because dominance factors in, right? Like, even if you don't have the medal count, like being that dominant, right?
Well, here, okay, let me jump in here. So she took the title in a head-to-head mega showdown with Daniela Mello in 2019. Right. And ever since 2019, we're in 2023. Ever since 2019, and that's a decent run of 4 years, yep, she has been the premier 84. 2019 world champion, missed 2020 due to COVID only, but she was the best in the world in 2020. 2021, she took the title. 2022, she took the title. That's 3 titles. Oh, and by the way, had won best lifter in 2 of those world championships.
Yep.
And at 1 year, despite not being in the heaviest weight class, had the heaviest total that year. I forget which year it was. Dominant. For sure, we are in the Amanda Lawrence era, and talk to me in a couple of weeks, and I would be shocked if she doesn't add another world title. So yeah, I think Amanda Lawrence, she had her mega showdown with Daniela Mello, super duper hyped. And she's young. She's still in her 20s, and she's going to have showdowns to come. Your girl, Jessica Bitter, might move up at some point. We see what happens, what Jess can do with a little extra body weight, see what it happens to her total. But yeah, I feel comfortable. So I think for sure with the Daniela Mello, Amanda Lawrence era.
I agree. Yeah. And I think that just kind of goes back to that. You can't just count medals, but I did want to give Yelja Strick some love just because
100%.
That's a pretty crazy run, and I think it's really important to see that it's happening late 30s to mid 40s when this is, the peak of one's career.
I love that you went back. I love that you went back and do show, because I was just saying on the podcast, we don't do this enough. And
Yeah.
hopefully some people tune in to hear about Amanda Lawrence. I keep saying Daniela Mello now. It's a bad mess up. And then, but hear about Strick. Yeah, better watch. But yeah.
Yeah. And people have short memories because the sport is, and I don't even like, I like, the meme, like, fuck these kids or whatever. I don't think it's just because the kids are arrogant or they're new to the sport and they don't care about the history. I think what it's really coming down to is that the sport has exploded. And because we've seen such a huge uptake in participation, there's been so many torches getting passed over so quickly, so many competitors, and the face of the sport has changed because the population competing in powerlifting is multiplied. And I think once that starts to level off a little bit, we're going to start to have a little bit longer memories, but we're still in the midst of that happening. So I don't blame anyone. I don't think there's anything bankrupt about our community or anything wrong with the young ones coming up. I think it's just a consequence of our popularity, which we should be very happy about.
And the digital assets back then is far fewer. Now, how many podcasts, how many posts, these people will be remembered more than back in the day where they probably didn't even have Instagram. They didn't have the streams. Go take a look at them. It's not going to look anything like Sheffield or anything like we have now. The people in the Sheffield era, you're going to be remembered. It's going to be different. 84 plus, my man. This is a tough one. Have we had an era?
Oh, get the hell out of here. Yeah. So this is one of the most dominant. I mean, I would say this is equally as dominant as a Jen Thompson or a Kim Walford, possibly more. When you just look at head and shoulders, Bonica Brown, 7 golds, 2014 to 2022 from the ages of 25 to 33, 2017 World Games gold, and the 2022 World Games silver. It's ridiculous. There's no one. I mean, there are some people who are approaching, and this coming Worlds will be interesting, but they're not that close. Ryan, I think the closest nominated total is like what, 20 kilos off?
Hang on one sec. Okay. Well, first off, I need to tell you, you got to pronounce her name Bonica.
Bonica. Apologies. Sorry, Bonica.
Funny that I'm correcting you because Playboy, there's a history there, but I've been told. But
I've met her and talked to her multiple times. So that is my bad, Bonica. We have met at 2 different at Worlds and Sheffield, and I got it right, and now on air I got it wrong, and I apologize.
But you're 100% right. Her reign of terror has been something else. And not only what's impressive is, before we get into the Worlds thing, to answer your question, sorry, I just want to jump in what you said before. Her reign of terror, that it's stretched over such a period, she's actually where previous competitors from her era, the Jen Thompsons, Kimberly Walfords and whatnot, the rest of the pack has caught up to them, surpassed. She's hanging tough. She's hanging tough, even over multiple eras, hanging tough. So hats off to her. That's very difficult to hang tough over this explosion of new talent coming down. For Bonica to be doing what she's doing in and out of equipment, crazy schedule at the world level, never dodging. And she's a fierce competitor. So hats off to her to that. And in terms of the Worlds, yes, sir, it is close. It's very, 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 very close. It's going to be a battle. I don't know who's going to win. This isn't the World's preview show, and you're going to be on the preview show, so we don't have to dissect it too much right now because we got some more conversation with Everest to talk about. But I'm super duper excited to watch it, and if Bonica pulls off the win, her legendary status shoots so far up because it's like the third generation. Yeah, it's like a third wave that she'll have faced and pushed back, and it's phenomenal. Again, it's one of those, like I said in sports, passing of the torch moment. That happens eventually at some point, or another chapter, another wave. Oh my God, she's done it again. So we'll see what happens, but it's crazy what's going to happen in the 84 pluses. It's very exciting. Where previously it wasn't as exciting. It's kind of dominance. Now we got battles, and you need close battles to make people, I have to tune in. And when I mean sports fans, and be like, I don't know who's going to win. Now it's a lot more entertaining. I don't know what's going to happen at the end of this movie. As opposed to you tuning like, I know exactly what's going to happen. It happens every year. This is good. This is good for Bonica, I'm sure. And she's feisty. She'll rise to the occasion, and same with the others. Do you want to get into the pound for pound talk, sir?
Let's do it.
Okay.
I do want to say one final thing on the importance of longevity.
Yes, sir.
I've talked about how there's only literally one exception where there was an era that occurred in someone's 20s, and that was the 83s, where we're still in Russ's era. And there was Brett Gibbs. Every single other weight class, if we want to decide who had an era extended at least to the age of 30, if not past it, and some into their 40s. So I just want to really caution the new folks to the sport. If your approach to powerlifting is such that you're going to burn out before your age starts with the 3, I think you should take a hard look in the mirror and decide if that's what you want. You know, who are you when you're not going to be part of this, and are you going to be satisfied? Or are you going to look back with regret? So it's a pretty important thing to be lifting weights and when and as you get older. And I know this is 2 old men yelling at the clouds, but take it from 2 guys whose age starts with 4.
Dude, I'm 27. What are you doing?
I mean, 2 guys who are turned 29 for more than 10 times. I will say that lifting is something that gives me a ton of meaning in life. A lot of other benefits. Has taught me a lot of lessons. And powerlifting and winning titles is great. Don't get me wrong. I've only experienced that as a coach, but I think that there's a lot to be had here, and play the long game, because that's where errors actually come from. And it's not just based upon this analysis. There is also a study that supports this, titled Peak Age and Performance Progression in World-Class Weightlifting and Powerlifting Athletes. So it looked at all the world championships, and this is equipped powerlifting as well as weightlifting, from 2003 to 2017. And among the powerlifters, the average peak age, so when they're just looking at their competitive history, when did they hit their highest total, was 35 with a standard deviation of 7, meaning that if we were to cover the majority of the bell curve, about 2/3 of people, it's somewhere between the ages of 28 and 42. And that's all athletes who are competing at world championships. So if you're peaking before that, might not be doing it right. Just want to say.
At the same time, what are you going to tell somebody who's winning a world title at 22? Be like, don't train so hard, and it's tough. They're going to be like, I mean, who knows? You can't. It's tough. It's tough. And what do you do? What do you do? Right? That 22-year-old's got to be like, look, I got to eat while I eat, while I can. It's but yeah, it's that was interesting. You sent me that, and when I seen 35, I'm like, wow. It kind of gets into, that's a very good segue for getting into the era pound for pound debate, because people are saying, is Taylor Atwood era over? Now let's just talk about what constitutes an era when it comes to pound for pound. Yes, you need to have won multiple titles, probably world titles at the very least. You have to have asserted a dominance. You need head-to-head to have done it on the platform. So anybody who could dispute, you face them and beat them head-to-head. Because we all know some people could blow up a local meet, and then when they go to the big, whether it's nationals or worlds, it's just not there. So you need to do it in head-to-head at the very highest of levels, and Taylor Atwood has done that. Also, though, if you like formulas for the pound for pound, Taylor Atwood removed all doubt by Wilks, GL points, as well as dots. He was the #1 powerlifter in the world and did the Jesus Oliveras before Jesus Oliveras, and also out-totaled the untested at the same time as being tested under WADA. So he was as dominant gets. And by the time he did that in 2021 with his 838.5, he had already been a world champion since 2018 and stayed the best lifter in his weight class since 2018 and won best lifter of all weight classes in 2019 World Championships. Oh, by the way, yes, USEPL was there. So he won best lifter over every single lifter at a world title event 2019. That's really when he established himself, 2019, as the pound for pound best. But if you went on different formulas, some people might nitpick here and there. In 2021, that's a wrap, son. In every single metric, period, that you wanted to talk about, Taylor was #1. So that's why Taylor... Yes, we had a Taylor Atwood era, and that's period. I'll talk about the women in a second. So are we leaving the Taylor Atwood era?
I don't think so.
This is where what you said earlier, eras aren't over that quickly. Before we crown someone else saying it's my era now, let's put a pin in that conversation first. To see the end of one era, Taylor Atwood was in Worlds 2022. I know for fact, and anyone who watched that live stream, and I was calling the action, he was operating around RPE 8, crew on, except for his bench, on his squat and his deadlift, just having fun, and cruise to 790 on purpose, because that's the half a kilo below the world record, because Sheffield was rolling around. So anyone who's like, he hasn't, look at his 2022, he easily would have blown beyond that. And walking into Worlds, he didn't think it'd be that easy, because he was training 3 days a week, and he knew I only need 790. So he actually held back training, and it still was RPE 8 on squat and deadlift to do so. And then in Sheffield, he's injured, and everyone knows he was injured. And he's coming into this World Championships, and people are starting to say, if he doesn't have a big performance at these Worlds, now we know his era is coming to close. I would push back on that and say he just needs to win Worlds, and we're still in his era, because 100% when you're in eras, in all sports, the Bulls will have won some ugly championships and it was close. Boxers and MMA fighters will have won some questionable decisions, like John Jones and GSP, where you're like, I thought the other guy might have actually won that fight. Have to rematch, or they win the next and the era continues on. You have bad spots. He's injured. 100% he's injured. We know this. And he's coming into this World injured. He's not 100%. He's going to be good enough. He might even win. It's going to be a scrappy win. But if it's under 800, I mean, he's not showing out because he's got Sheffield. Even if he could blow the rest of the world out of the water, why would he do so when he could actually be healthy for the next Sheffield? Because he's got a massive offseason. And there you blow it out of the water, win a huge bag, and you're the Sheffield winner and whatever back on top. You wouldn't do that. So that's why people are somewhat stacking the deck to put a close on the Taylor Atwood era, possibly prematurely. I'm not saying it's a definitive thing that he's going to come back to a 38.5. I'm not saying that either. All I'm saying is we don't have proof yet based off of Sheffield. And if you're trying to load it up, that if I don't see this from Taylor at Worlds, that means it's over. I would tell you, even full healthy, he's not going to blow it up, because it's the same as last Worlds. Why would he do that? He's shooting himself in the foot for Sheffield. And on top of that, he's definitely still injured. He's not 100%. I think judge him on next Sheffield. If he can get through these Worlds, and Tim Monaghatti's a whole nother deal. I don't got to tell you, you're coming from New Zealand. You probably hear whispers. And again, this isn't a Worlds preview show, but that's where I push back and say, yes, it's not definitive. It's the end of it. You can't end an era if he's about to become a world champion. Here's what Perk would need if we're just going to end an era. Because again, it's not your era until you have a run. Perk would had to do what he did, head up, and be like, the torch has been passed. Then it's harder. Now it's only one win. Let's go back to Evie beating Naomi. Let's go back to, we've seen this in a couple. Jade beating Joy. Sometimes you need multiple wins. Sometimes you need an assertion of dominance. Joy, by the way, is a 63 at this World, so we're not going to have that. I just remembered. We're not going to have that rematch. So maybe the Joy era at 57 is over. But anyways.
Perhaps.
I just caught myself before the episode's over. Thank God. DMs would have got blown up. But nevertheless, one win even, it helps. It would help because, Perk wants to say the era's over because it might signify the beginning of a new one. And I don't blame him. Again, I don't blame him. I'd be doing the same damn thing if I was Perk. What would help Perk? What helps it is to beat him straight up in comp, not at a local meet, blowing up a local meet, not at another platform. It's the king. To be the champ, you got to beat the champ. He's the king. He's not just the king of your weight class, and he's for sure the king of the weight class, but pound for pound, even that should be harder to dethrone somebody than the guy's currently injured. And it's like, all right, I'm going to hit a massive total and be like, okay, it's over. And Perk should respect this, because if Perk does establish himself as an era, I'm going to go to bat for Perk the same way if someone comes at Perk. And I'm like, hey, Perk ended up facing Atwood head to head, taking titles, making a run. And for Perk to do pound for pound, for a weight class, that's different. if we're talking weight class. But if I would defend Perk that way. But if someone's going to take Atwood's pound for pound, here's a couple of things I want to throw out here. Not only did he take all of the different formulas, as well as have a crazy run in terms of title after title after title, and was the premier lifter in his weight class at world levels, at world championships, and a crazy amount of judging. Everyone knows how strict the judging is. Also, and this is where Pete Spence said, you know what I think as well, if it's an era, you took the standard, he took that world record and ran with it. From 790, he picked it up. It was like 775, but he ran with 790, put up 838.5. 838.5. Perk, the closest competitor below him was 800. Oh, it was Perk, which is phenomenal. Perk was doing that as a junior, but he was 838.5 kilos ahead of the rest of the world. And then beneath Perk, it was another drop. It's insane. He was so far. He took the world record and destroyed it. He took it for a run like we had never seen. It's remarkable. I get it. It was at a national, it's not worlds, but everyone understands what we're saying. We're just looking at the open powerlifting. It's incredible. So again, hitting at all metrics, if you're going to end his era, nudging, and this is for anyone, nudging past the total world record by a couple kilos, or getting just the DOTS formula, not the GL, not Wilks, or, understand what Taylor had to do to make it his era. Taylor won a string of world titles, won best lifter at the world championships, took every single formula, smashed a record, took it for a flip and ride, and out-totaled everybody in the untested. Do you understand how dominant that is? That's ridiculous. That's pound for pound. That's pound for pound.
You ain't got to tell me, Ryan.
I just went on a fucking tirade. I know.
I loved it.
I'm passionate, but
you've said a lot of things. You've covered most of the ground that I was going to cover, but I do have 3 things to say.
Woo, let's go.
Number 1, if you have to be at your best and the other person has to be at their worst, but still barely able to compete, kind of limping along to beat them, it's their era, not yours. 1. 2, the people who are like, oh, he's got a kid now, he's got a hard job, he's in his 30s. That's half of the powerlifters I know. Like I hit my best total to date coming back after I got bilateral hip surgery, and I'm like, I'm a pretty busy person, and I'm no exception. I'm not some God's gift to powerlifting. Like just look at the ages of the people who I said who had their peaks. During those periods, they had some down years. They got 2 golds and then a bronze, probably because they were hurt, probably because they had a kid, probably because they had something going on. So and then the third thing I will say is that it is very difficult to tell the end of an era until it's not just one of those down spikes. Like we need a little bit of time on it. Like you said, Ali loses a fight. It's not the end of the Ali era. Now, if different version of reality, Ali had lost 3 fights and retired, then it was, right?
Yes.
But exactly. You can't know that until it happens, right? So the first year that Kim Walford did not win worlds, we weren't like, oh, it's a wrap, it's done. It was like, okay, so that wasn't her best year. Let's see if she can come back and rally. She's a fighter, that type of mentality. And I think there's no reason not to extend that same expectation, or at least openness, to Taylor. And I think he's early 30s. Like he's not mid 30s. He's not late 30s. He's not catastrophically injured. Like he put up a pretty big total at Sheffield, not being only injured, but also basically vomiting out down to a lower weight class for the night prior. And I don't know if it's just vomiting, but both ends. The man is having it rough. I was there. I saw the look of death. And I tried to give him that rallying story of, hey, the guys who cut weight for 24 hours, they come back, they're good, you're fine. And he did pretty friggin' well considering everything going on. So yeah, I just think it's very premature. And he doesn't, like, we don't signify an era by being at that person's peak. The era is relative to everybody else, right? So he doesn't have to hit 838 to maintain the Taylor Atwood era. He just needs to be better than everybody else, which he is more than that at 838, but he's still there. He is a tenth over the dominance of attentive dominance over everyone else. You don't just look at the peak. The tent ends when it hits the ground, and he's not there yet, I don't think. It's possible. It could be that he goes to Worlds, gets even worse hurt, doesn't win, retires, and he's done. And then, yeah, maybe the end of his era was now, but we can't know that now. So people can make the predictions they want, but I would say that the things that they're predicting it being over, oh, he's got a hard job, oh, he's got a kid, oh, he has an injury. Like, I don't know any powerlifters who've been in the game for more than 5 years or 10 years who at least 2 of those don't apply to at some point, and it's not the end of their peak. So why would we apply that to Taylor?
And he's 34, and we just said the numbers by data and science says 35 is peak. It doesn't mean he has
mean peak. It's the mean peak.
Yeah, mean peak. Sorry.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that's Taylor. Maybe he peaked earlier, but I'm just saying it can happen. And to your point, we won't know for another bit of time. We need more time. It sounds premature. And look at sports fans. It's okay to debate this. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what we all do. The king is dead, blah, blah, blah. I ain't mad about it. This is juicy stuff. And again, I ain't mad at Perk. Perk, you got to, or Bob Matthews or anyone who's like, this is my era now. They're doing exactly what I would do in their position, what they should be doing. And it makes great discussion. This is what makes sports so juicy. And it is firing up Taylor. He's getting fired up for this world. It might be exactly what he needs. Let's see. To talk about earlier, you wanted to ask about Leah Bavois and whether or not, pound for pound, where she rests at. Actually, before we shift over, let me just say, in the untested division, John Hack also has every single formula, and we are in the John Hack era in untested, and it's not even close. And he breaks records in multiple different weight classes. It's difficult to compare, and this is where you cannot compare Taylor Atwood and John Hack in terms of accomplishment. Jesus Oliveira has bypassed one of Taylor's formulas on one of the formulas, and that's going to happen. There is far more lifters in the tested than untested. The talent pool is much greater in the tested. It's going to be much harder. Much harder to remain at the top in the tested division. And that's with all due respect to the untested. I'm not throwing shade, but that's just numbers. But John Hack is by far, and John Hack is a world champion in the tested as well. That's what asserts his dominance. So we are for sure also in the John Hack era. The Atwood and Hack eras are overlapping. Yep. Let me just say that. Let me put that out there. Just because I know those two kind of got into it on King of the List. Actually, they both came on, said their piece. And you know what? They're both right. They're both goats. They're both goats. And they're both doing their damn thing. Now let's talk about Leah Bavois. Let me pull this up here. Leah Bavois, if you want to go by Wilks, is number one. If you want to go by GL points, is number one. And if you want to go by dots, is number one. The only thing you could give Leah Bavois is she hasn't had the title run that Taylor Atwood has had. So there's that one caveat for Leah Bavois. But Leah Bavois, however, if you like records and what she's done with the records and what she's done to the standard, she's done it, unlike Taylor, in 2 different weight classes.
Yep.
In the 63s, took the world record, ran with it. In the 69s, took the world record and ran with it, as well as won a world title, as well as faced Gara head-to-head competition, even if not at Worlds. Yes, she missed weight at Worlds. Faced Gara, who was the number one competitor. Her biggest competitor and rival is definitely Gara. And Gara wasn't at Worlds either. In a way, the competition was stiffer that she had because she had to beat Gara of all people. Do you know her, guys? She's good. Look her up. And faced her and as a win over her, avenging the 2019 loss to her, and established herself as, this is my era in my books, because she has all of the formulas, has a major showdown with Gara, has a world title to her name, and then also satisfies breaking the world record and making a run of it at 63, and breaking the world record and making a run of it at 69, far and away ahead of the rest of the pack, establishing dominance like Taylor did. So I believe we are in the Leah Bavois era. But I do want to say one thing. Amanda Lawrence.
Right there.
Amanda Lawrence is right there. Pound for pound. We already said she's 84. Pound for pound. She's won multiple time, well, like all these world records, but best lifter as well. And if you're looking at the formulas, there are years that she was number one. I don't know if I look back at, we could take a look back at some of the different years here, but Amanda Lawrence is right there with her. And to effect that Taylor didn't have, Taylor didn't have a rival pound for pound. You had to go to the untested, talk about John Hack. But with Leah Bavois, Amanda Lawrence could raise her hand and say, "Excuse me, pardon me." I say right now, let's talk about after world champion. Let's talk about after worlds. Let's see what happened after worlds. Who wins best lifter and who's still number one in all the different formulas. I think it'll really help clear the muddy waters this World Championships 2022. And if we want to talk untested again, I should throw this out there. In the Raw, it's Christy Hawkins. In Raw with Wraps, Mariana is got a hell of a run as well and got a bunch of the formulas. So, but Christy's got all the formulas in terms of the Raw, and she's a phenomenal lifter. And to your point, 40 years old and still doing a damn thing. And it's not always in the untested that happens. And she's got a reign of terror under her as well. But what are your thoughts on the women, sir?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Leah Bavois is clearly right now, we're in the Leah Bavois pound for pound best female tested lifter, period. But it is not like I said, it was clear, period, all that stuff. But with Taylor, it's like, and no one's close, right? That's not the case in the women, which I think is exciting. And on Iron Culture, early in 2021, I believe we had Amanda on, I want to say like in April or May, and we titled it The Strongest Powerlifter because she had the highest tested formula in the sport. And that was from a total that I think a lot of people were assuming was just this kind of outlier performance that she did at a local meet. It was the Gaines Giving Open at the end of 2020. She put up a 646 total, and that was like a ridiculous dots. It was ridiculous everything. And she was the best at that point. And that was not that long ago. And I think it was really good to see her at Sheffield put up 645 and also pull the heaviest deadlift in the history of women's IPF, toppling Jess Bittner's that she did at Worlds the year prior. So to say that Amanda Lawrence is in the conversation is almost downplaying just how close she is. I think anyone who thought like, oh, that's 646, then after that, she didn't even get close to it. It's like 610, 620, 630. I think, no, I think we're going to see Amanda's not done. She's young. And I think there is going to be some really interesting battles to come for who's winning best lifter at Worlds. And I'm excited because there are multiple highly dominant potential cross weight class people on the women's side, Amanda and Leah being the two most obvious contenders.
And this is where, if you want it to be your era, you got to check those boxes we just said. And it has to be that's the standard. It has to be that difficult. Take every single formula, out total people who are on gear in the equipped, and also have like world titles, head-to-head showdowns, and take that record and just run with it. And it's yours by a country mile. Is that a lot? Is that asking a lot? Oh, yeah. Yeah, pound for pound.
Era is a big claim, right?
Pound for pound.
I mean, I would say even weight class eras, it's a big claim. You need to be doing more than just being like, hey, I've got a big total in a non-head-to-head battle and I had some left in the tank and it could have been better than the other person this one time. Like you can say, I think I'm the best right now. And you might even be right. But to claim an era, I think is a whole nother thing. And like I said, neither one of us are discouraging the lifters themselves from a little bit of chest thumping, because I think that is just the nature of being competitive to some degree. Not for everyone. I mean, there's different versions of what competitiveness looks like, and some people are more inwardly focused. And I encourage people to be competitive, rising tide lifts all ships. But I think if we want to think about it as the powerlifting community, which hopefully we can give some voice to, man, era should be something that is meaningful and is not just like, oh shit, did you see on Instagram he hit a big squat? Like,
Yeah,
get out of here. Like, you know, like
you can't have a good local meet. You can't have a good 6-month run. You can't even have a good year. You need like exactly what we just said. It's very pound for pound anyways is more difficult because you need all these formulas. You need, you know, smashing records. You need so much for your weight class. Obviously, I mean, look at Russell Orhe. You know, this is an interesting one. Russell Orhe moved up to the 90 kilo class, took the record for the world record. I understand 90 kilos is pretty much only contested in the US. So it is what it is, but however, it's actually a stitch higher than the 93. So it's a legitimate world record. Took the world record from Brandon Petrie. However, Brandon Petrie is above him on 2 of the formulas, possibly 3, because he weighed in slightly less. That's why when people use formulas only, it doesn't tell the full story, does it, huh? I want you, it's harder than that if we're talking eras and etc. The best is when you face someone face head to head on the platform, and then there's a passing of the torch. But that's why if you want a full on era, undisputed, this is mine in the 90, for instance, you know, you're going to need some dominance there. You're going to need to beat someone head up. You're going to need to take a record. You're going to need the formulas, etc. You need, you know, you know what, if it's the weight class, I don't even think formulas should come into play. You know what the formula is? You're weigh in under 90, weigh in under 82, weigh in under whatever the hell your weight class is. If it's weight class, formulas are right out the window. The only reason why formulas come into play is if we're talking pound for pound. And if you want to be pound for pound, you probably can't just use one formula because you probably like a certain formula.
You better have a PowerPoint presentation if you want to claim pound for pound era status. I need to have multiple data points.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you got to have something to bring to the party if you're going to claim such a not only something that has to do with consistency and longevity, but also dominance. Yeah, there's more than one box to tick. That's for sure.
It's a tough one, dude. I think we had a pretty good discussion here, huh?
I agree.
Dude, is there anything else we should pop in there? Do you think we pretty much beat the hell out of that horse?
Well, I will just leave it with the fact that it is a difficult needle to thread with doing what you need to be competitive with other people who are doing what they need to be competitive, while also thinking about longevity in sport and sustainability. But if what you're doing currently makes you feel like the end of the tunnel is coming faster or it's getting shorter, you need to probably put more time thinking about your career as a powerlifter than just this competition or this world's, or how do I get the most out of myself right now? And if that's a struggle for you to do as an athlete, I would encourage you to have people in your corner who can maybe help you retain that perspective, because there is life after powerlifting. And if you do it right, I think there could be a 10-year span of you kicking major ass in the sport.
And I would say, live fast, die young, leave a good looking corpse. And be a legend like Tupac and Biggie. And that's how it's done.
Get shot.
Get shot, be a legend, and end up on t-shirts and people paying homage. All right, listen, everybody, if you're hearing this and you disagree, you want to debate a little bit in the stories or hop in our DMs, we'll have a good little group chat and group talk and have some debating, and maybe we have something to talk about. And I already dropped, Eric will be at the preview show. We're going to have some other guests for the preview show. We got an all-star cast when it comes to scouting. Believe me, you don't want to miss our preview show. We got the best of the best for this one. So until next time, 6-pack Lapadat, 6 up, and we are out.